The parlous state, if I can be very diplomatic, of the South African National Defence Force has been shown up multiple times over the last few years, most notably, of course, in the DRC, where we had the SANDF as part of a so-called peacekeeping mission. We had issues of mission creep, basic equipment and logistics issues, as well affecting the ability of our troops, of course. And then we've got the issue domestically year after year, South Africa's porous borders, that impact on governance, on national security, on what citizens want their government to deal with, and also just from a basic safety point of view for South African citizens. One needs a capable army, navy, and air force. So lots for us to figure out as to the current state of the SANDF and possible recommendations for how the massive creaking ship could be righted, if at all. But joining us to unpack all of this is Mr. Ricardo Teixeira. Ricardo, thank you very much for making time for today, your first appearance here with the CRA, hopefully the first of many. We'll start just a high-level overview. So recently, in response to a post by Adam Habib on the state of the SANDF, its critical functions, resources, etc., you replied and you posted in a response and said, at the expense of our national security, SANDF became a welfare organization. One the government thinks it can throw at any problem, and suddenly it'll get solved while spending as little as possible. It's quite the I think the sobering and realistic assessment. And I think given the state of the SANDF, we need analysts and policymakers to deal with the reality. We can't pretend that it's something that it isn't anymore. It's not what it was 10, 15, 20, 30, many years ago. So tell us a little bit what you think of the current state of the SANDF and what prompted you to respond in that kind of manner to Professor Habib.
And I've been I've been saying this for a while now, and I'm glad that people are starting to catch on and to that this is becoming more of a mainstream conversation. So I was quite happy to see Professor Habib come into the conversation, because for a long time SANDF has kind of been and South African defence has kind of been something that has been pushed to the periphery. It's not been a topic that you've seen a lot of conversation about. I remember a few years ago, there was an assessment that the Department of Defense actually had one of the highest approval ratings out of any government department. And that was due mostly, in fact, to the fact that they didn't really have much coverage on them and nobody really knew what was going on. But then we kind of saw things turn around when we had the SANDF deployed domestically during COVID, the response to the July 21 riots, the deployment to the Mozambique, and then we saw, we've been deployed to the DRC, specifically in the Kivu provinces around Lake Kivu. And since I was a child, it was early 2000s. We've been there longer than America was in Afghanistan, and now it was all under the auspice of under the UN, under their Force Intervention Brigade under MONUSCO, previously MONUC, and then SANDF decided, under the SADC framework, they were going to go in under a bit of a peace enforcement mandate, but they didn't change their tactics. They didn't change their doctrine, and their level of operations were still indicative of peacekeeping when, they were surrounded by and put themselves right up against populated civilian areas. They didn't go for the high ground, and they kind of thought it was going to be the same as Force Intervention Brigade, but they didn't take the same assets, they didn't take the same mindset, and they didn't do the same level of planning. And we've seen the results of this now. And I'm glad that this has become a broader public discussion. But yes, the current state of SANDF, in my opinion, it is in the worst state it's in back there to around 1960, when we were no longer part of the Union of South Africa under the British Empire. We became an independent state. Since then, this is probably the worst state the South African Army has been in.
Ricardo, a question about resources. So we can talk later a little bit about equipment and then just stock of assets, as it were, the usual, the numbers that get people excited, how many fighter jets, tanks, all that kind of stuff. But to get all that, you need funding. And what is the current picture, and maybe the last 5 years or so, the trend line, or 10 years, in terms of what the national spending is on not just SANDF, but on NAL, on Arms Corps, sort of related ecosystem, as it were?
So the defense spending has been going down steadily since 1994. I mean, it was at unsustainable levels in the late 80s, and with the end of the border war and the end of apartheid, the defense spending came down, which is rightfully so. There were other government priorities. I got into a little bit of trouble saying that, the government's priority was human security, and they shifted all of their spending towards healthcare and education at the expense of national security. And of course, I mean, in my opinion, and I will always say this, it was, in my opinion, the right decision to make, considering the state South Africa was in. But given the current state of our defense force, our healthcare, and our education, was all of that worth it? I mean, we're spending over 300 million on education, and we're still having so many problems with education. Defense became kind of an afterthought. Your defense budget, people see it as something that just kind of goes off into the ether. But this is spending that is your insurance policy. It's not something you can just pull out of the back of the cupboard when you need it. It has to be there because you had to spend it consistently. There's not going to be metaphorically a gun in the drawer unless you've bought the gun. But the major cuts in defense spending kind of started around 2010, 2011, specifically under the presidency of former President Jacob Zuma, and there are some key things to look at the time. It was just after 2010. A lot of the new equipment that was purchased under the arms deal was coming into service and becoming operational between about 2007 and 2010. We had the 4 frigates, we had the Gripens, we had the Hawks, we had the Alouettes. Not the Alouettes, sorry, the A109s and the LUHs. And then we had the Roy Fox coming into service as well. And that was the point where the money that was spent on the defense force was supposed to start shifting from, okay, now the arms package has been paid for. We now need to go on to revitalizing the land forces equipment, because they were left out of the strategic arms procurement because they were in the best state at the time those decisions were made, having just fought a major land war. But that never happened. And around 2010, there was a march with SANDF when the government said that the defense force and soldiers weren't allowed to have a union, and they, unarmed in uniform, did a protest march on the union buildings, and it was ruled that they did have the right to have a union. But that kind of scared the government a little bit, and you can put 2 and 2 together. But thereafter, some things started happening, like the A400 deal got cancelled, salaries start going up, defense spending starts going down. 2013, the Defense Review is commissioned, and while they were writing it, Nick Sendell noted in a parliamentary presentation a few months ago that while they were writing the review and they gave their updates to the committee and to the Department of Defense, that the defense cuts need to stop, that they need to, quote unquote, arrest the decline. And then immediately after that, the next budget review came up and the budget went down, and then it just continued on a downtrend. And when the review was published in 2015, they again said the funding needs to stop, that underfunding needs to stop, and it continued to go down from there. It is now sitting at around 0.74% of GDP. They had an increase of a decrease of about 1.4%, even though they had an increase in monetary terms due to it not matching inflation. There was a real-time decline, and it is now at its lowest point that it's ever been. I don't think defense spending has ever been this low in the history of the South African Army. And ultimately, that we've got this, this massive backlog, and we're seeing calls for the defense budget to raise to about 1.5% of GDP. But if you look at where salary spends are at about 64% of the budget, if you want that to be at 30% of the budget, you don't need to double the budget. You need to triple the budget. So realistically, for the ambition that the government has reaffirmed for SANDF and the Department of Defense in the National Security Strategy, the budget should be sitting, in order to support that, at around 1.8 to 2.2%. It's still sitting at 0.74%.
And Ricardo, I mean, even there, let's assume South Africa gets between 6 and 10% growth for the next, 5 to 10 years, that there's more tax revenue, all that kind of thing. Let's assume there's, or just, I guess, run the money printers, and that doesn't devalue your currency. So you can spend what you like on things like defense, and we increase that to the targets that you mentioned. I think something that you've also highlighted, which is crucial, is that a lot of that spending goes to connected individuals. It goes to sort of bloated, maybe not top brass, but sort of top management, as it were. It doesn't go to the investments in SANDF and supporting entities like it should do. Could I ask you to just highlight that point a bit, where I think we see now, once again, in many areas of South African public society life, economic life, the sort of creep of things like cater deployment, of jobs for friends, of patronage, that kind of thing impacting on where scarce resources are spent.
It's actually, in my opinion, one of the biggest issues in SANDF, and it's a leadership issue and a culture issue, because we've got, if you look at basically from the rank of colonel and up, salary grades 12 to 15, I believe. Basically, if you want to be a general, that decision gets made by Latuli House. It is an important decision, and an important question that we need to ask is, on what grounds are those promotions made, and who gets to decide? Because it is made by the Committee for Cadre Deployment, and if we look at since 2000, around about there, all of the chiefs, barring two of them, one GOC and former chief of the Air Force, which is General Gaggiano. Aside from them, every other chief has been an MK veteran. And those high ups are enjoying good salaries. They get driven around. They earn over $1 million a year. They get lots of benefits. The chief of the army lives not far from me, up the road in Waterkloof, in a very nice house that the previous parliament under the 6th administration were asking about why the renovation cost for that house was so high. And it infamously came out that they, on the army's budget, renovated his son's room to a Superman-themed bedroom. But then we see issues on the lower side of the ranks. For example, the flight engineers. Within the South African Air Force, there are 5 flight engineers. So you're supposed to have 1 flight engineer and 2, a pilot and a co-pilot on every Oryx. If we had the entire Oryx fleet operable, you could only technically fly 5 of them, because that's the limited number of flight engineers you have. And part of the decision there was that their allowances would not be the same as flight crew, because they're not pilots. It would be the same as ground crew. So there was a big issue there, and it's de-incentivized the people to be flight engineers, and a lot of them have left. And we are seeing now with the troops that have come back from the DRC, and in a bit of a scuffle legally with Sandu representing them and the Defence Force higher-ups and the command over, again, allowances. Soldiers on the lower end don't get the allowances they're supposed to get. Everybody on the mission to under MONUSCO, regardless of whether you're admin staff, special forces, quick reaction force, infantry, everybody gets the same daily allowance, whether you are getting shot at or sitting in an air-conditioned office. And rightfully so, many feel it is unfair. Again, it's the UN pays a certain amount of money per soldier to SANDF, and then SANDF, under their discretion, pays out the allowances. From there, where the rest of the money goes, I am afraid to ask that question. But then if you again look at when we're at Lohatla, every November for the exercise Vukushlome, you've got the higher ups sitting under a tent in these big comfy armchairs with a carpet, and they get to sit in a tent and have their distinguished guests meal. The troops sit in the sun on their butts in the dirt. They stay there for 2 months, some shorter than that, but yeah, some of them are there for up to 2 months for the exercise on dry rations. When I arrived there last year, one of my contacts greeted me, and I asked him, "So how's it been?" And he'd been there for about a month, and he said, "Yeah, I've been on dry rations the entire time we're here." And he pointed at the porta potties, and he said, "Those only arrived this morning." And I looked at him confused, and he said, "Don't stray from the beaten path," if you know what I mean. Landmines are not of the explosive variety. There is a huge disconnect between the rank and file and the higher ups, and it's very, very low morale on the majority of the rank and file. Soldiers aren't happy. I mean, soldiers are always going to complain. They're always going to complain about pay, no matter how much you pay them. But I feel there are some serious issues in that regard, where the higher ups are kind of treated like royalty, and the lower ranks are treated as do what you're told, follow the order, whether it's legal or not, and shut up.
I think that's it's pretty accurate in terms of where we sit at the moment. Ricardo, in terms of low morale, you mentioned the national security strategy and other reports, I think, around it as well, where we had the minister and the presidency, Kumbutsu and Chaveni, at the sort of press briefing at which the reports were released, And what was most widely reported was her attempt to talk about the risk or the threat of a coup d'état, but to also say it's not that anyone is planning that, but if they were, we know about that. We track that kind of thing. But she tends to not always describe these things in the clearest terms. If one has low morale amongst your troops, I know that's not the only ingredient that you would need for a coup d'état, for the army to be used in that kind of way. I mean, what do you think of the possibility of a coup? Do you think it's in any way realistic? Because one of the things you need is to control the army.
In the world we live in, coups are possible. I mean, especially in Africa, we've had more coups in Africa in the last 5 years than in the previous decade. And it just seems to be, specifically in West Africa, that's the way the governments change. That being said, possibility and probability are two different things. I think the probability is low, specifically because SANDF has been coup-proofed. I mean, with the underfunding and the cuts specifically to maintenance and the state of prime mission equipment, there's not really much you can use. And that which is operable is stored at Lahatla out in the middle of Northern Cape, which is, if you draw a line between Kimberley and Uppington and you go at the halfway mark, that's where Lahatla is. It's quite literally as far from Parliament and the Union buildings as you can put it. Then again, coups happen very quickly, but they need public support. And I don't think there's public support. You need the public support, you need the government to be weak, and you need the defense force to decide to do something and have the ability. We don't have all of those things happening. But then to carry one out, you need to capture the radios, you need to capture the airport, you need to capture the points of government. Now, because we have 3 capitals, our parliament, our courts, and our union buildings are all in different cities, which makes that incredibly difficult. So I think pulling off a coup in South Africa would be incredibly difficult. I don't think it's probable in the near or even the medium term. I think it is quite unlikely, specifically from SANDF. If a coup were to happen, I think it would most likely be carried out by the police. I mean, the police already surround all the ministers. They're already at all the national key points. They have the budget. They have the factionalism, the political infighting. They lack the motivation. So again, possibility is there. It's higher than from the defense force, but probability is still incredibly low.
I think that would have been the high point in this particular discussion, that given how the SANDF has been driven into the ground, the low probability of a coup emanating from there, at least. Ricardo, if I can ask you about just equipment. So if one looks at a country of South Africa's geographical size, if you look at population size, are there sort of international benchmarks that we need to keep in mind in terms of what a national defense force should have in terms of operational personnel carriers, helicopters, frigates, that kind of thing? If you have any of those numbers for us, and then also where we sit in relation to some of those benchmarks. And I do stress operational, because it's one thing to have it in your sort of stock, as it were, but if they're not, any of them, if only 1% is operational, then.
So I'm going to start on the naval side, because I feel that that's the most important. The army is the largest component, which I think is a mistake, given our strategic vulnerability and our strategic opportunity in the maritime domain. Most people will look at South Africa on a map and go, oh, it's right there to the Africa, and they'll look up. I like to flip the continent upside down and look upwards towards the ocean. And again, people will think that we're a bi-oceanic country with the Indian Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean, but we're actually tri-oceanic, because we have the Atlantic as well. If we look at our maritime area of responsibility, it goes all the way down to the Arctic, and then it comes up on the Atlantic side, where we border halfway through the Atlantic Ocean, Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil. And we take maritime search and rescue as a responsibility over from Namibia. So it's all the way up to the Namibian border with Angola in terms of maritime search and rescue responsibility. Then on the Atlantic side, it goes all the way out to through the Mozambique Channel. We have an agreement with Mozambique and Tanzania through the Mozambique Channel and the Comoros, and then out to Reunion Island and Marion Islands, and then all the way back down to the Arctic. So it's a very, very large area to patrol. Our exclusive economic zone, which is 200 nautical miles from the coastline, that in itself, which is a small slice of the overall area we are responsible for, that area is over 1.5 million square kilometers. Now, there are 3 African countries that have what you call a blue water navy, which is the ability to go out into the deep ocean. And the other two that have that ability sit in the Mediterranean. They're Egypt and Algeria. So we're the only African country in both the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean that has a blue water capability, but it is very limited. On paper, it's 3 submarines and 4 frigates. Of each, there's only one of each semi-operable. SAS Amatola, the lead ship of the Valor-class frigates, has constabulary roles at the moment. She's not fully operational. Same with the submarine. I believe it's, I'm not, I'll be lying if I tell you which one it is, but it's S101, I believe. S103 maybe. I've got a photo of it. I'll need to have a look. But yeah, we don't have enough. Now, if you look, we've got 3 submarines. We look at other countries that have similar numbers of submarines. It's the Netherlands. And if you look at the Netherlands area of responsibility compared to ours, we've got a lot larger of an area. And then let's look at Peru, for example. Uses the same submarine we do, the Type 209. But they have 6 of them. And again, they have a much smaller area. Given our area of responsibility, I believe the number of submarines we would realistically need is somewhere on the 8 to 12 mark, depending on the model and budget available. But it is just not fiscally possible at the moment. On the frigate side, probably 6 to 8 is more realistic. We only have 4. But where we really lack on the naval side is fast attack craft and offshore patrol vessels. The chief of the Navy at the Sea Power for Africa Symposium last year in October down in Cape Town said that he feels the Navy needs 15 offshore patrol vessels, which will be able to do the entire exclusive economic zone, and the more larger patrol vessels, we're talking 98-meter length. Under Project Bureau, Darman won the tender, but were not awarded a contract for offshore patrol. They did get the contract for inshore patrol and built the 3 Warrior class vessels, which are now fully commissioned and in service. But they are limited to about 12 to 20 nautical miles off the coast. So they are really, ideally how they should be used is one should be placed at each port and just patrol the areas around the port, whereas the offshore vessels will take over the larger exclusive economic zone. And then the frigates and combat support vessels and submarines will take over the larger areas of responsibility up through the channel, out into the Atlantic, out into the Indian Ocean. But the Navy, in my opinion, has a deficit of about 28 to 36 vessels. They need a lot more ships for our area of responsibility. And I think they have enough personnel for the number of ships they would like to have, but they have too many for the number of ships that they do have. Then if we go to the Air Force, the 96 white paper outlined a requirement for 36 fighter jets. We have 26. So we are a little bit short there, but I think if we had all of the Gripens operable, currently only 12 are covered by the maintenance contract, which expires at the end of August 2025. I hope it gets extended or renewed. But only the policy is for only 2 to be combat ready at any given time. And they're finally getting their deliveries of the A-Data. They got their first 4 operational missiles this month because they were the IRIS-T interim capability missiles, which were supposed to be just a placeholder until the A-Data came, were running quite low and approaching the end of their shelf life. But the Air Force lacks a beyond visual range missile, so they only have short range. So, for example, if we had air-to-air combat with Angola with their Su-30s, they have BB rams that can reach out to about 160 kilometers. The Gripens can only engage at about the 30-kilometer mark with the A-Data. They don't have that over-the-horizon beyond visual range missile. Denal has developed one. It's known as Project Marlin. It just hasn't reached production stage. If it does, we will be the 6th country to have developed such a missile, along with India, China, Russia, the US, and the European Union. European Union's one is also operational on the Gripen. It's known as the Meteor. But yeah, then we go to the rotary wing side, and the 96 white paper outlined a requirement for 96 heavy lift, also medium lift rotary wing platforms, such as the Oryx. We have 39 airframes, so that wouldn't even get halfway. I don't know how many of the Oryx are operational at this given time. I don't know how many will be recoverable to full operational status, but there needs to be quite a bit of work done on that side. I mean, we got the 30 LUHs, the light utilities, the A109s. 6 have been written off. And I think that was the wrong purchase. They overloaded it with too much communication equipment and optical equipment than it was able to carry. And it was, In my opinion, that was a bad decision, although it outperformed the other helicopters in that class. I think there are much better options these days in that class, such as the H145M from Airbus. But yeah, we need more helicopters. We just do not have enough. Given the sort of the lack of infrastructure in the operational areas that the Army operates in, airlift is crucial. And again, if we go up to the tactical and the intermediate or medium and long range fixed wing, all we've got really is on paper 6 C-130s, of which only one is operable at the moment, and that's 401, which is the first of the C-130s we acquired back in 1963, 1962. Now I live in the flight line of Waterkloof, so occasionally it does fly over my house, and it is good to see it be more operable these days. And recently it's been doing paradrops out by Bloemfontein. But again, it's not enough. We had a 1.12 of them. I think 6 will be recoverable, but there is a need for 10 to 16 what you call medium lift transporters. The goal for the Air Force is to acquire the C-390 from Embraer. I would like to know how that deal's going, because they progressed to an MOU, but none have been acquired yet. Then there is a need for light tactical airlift, such as the C-27J from Leonardo, previously Aramachi, or the C-295 from Airbus. There are 2 opportunities there. I mean, with the C-295, India has chosen it as their maritime patrol aircraft. So Tata Aerospace is building 50 airframes in India, and there's an opportunity for us to get a good BRICS deal where we could buy the airframes from India and have them assembled here by Denel in cooperation with Airbus. I put these ideas out, nobody listens. And yeah, when it comes to attack helicopters, I want to stress, because everybody is like, oh, where's the Roy Falk? In my opinion, the Roy Falk is dead. When they only built 12 of them, and they kind of built them by hand. They didn't have a huge production line, and the rigs were disassembled afterwards, and they built a set number of spares. And when those spares run out, which will likely be soon, that's really the end of it. I know Denel talks about that they're going to build this Roy Falk Mark II, but I don't think the capability is there anymore. I think it is one of the most profound losses for our defense industry, is the loss of the ability to sustain the Roy Falk. I think it is something, it's a great tragedy. I don't foresee it being recovered. There's also a huge requirement for drones, both from the medium altitude, long endurance, and down to the tactical level, down to the squad level. There needs to be a huge integration of drones there on throughout the military. And then, if we want to go down to the Army, I mean, the Army doesn't even have any divisions on paper. They've got 2 brigade headquarters, no permanent units assigned. So it's very difficult to assess the Army, because you've got all these battalions scattered around the country. And any deployment you want to do, you got to go, okay, who can give me what? And you got to pull 1 battalion from Bloemfontein, 1 from Limpopo. You got to pull some artillery units from Depot, and the guys from Potchefstroom. You got to pull engineers from Tabatwane. You got to pull medics from wherever you can find them. And the guys have never trained together. They're not permanently assigned to each other. And then you kind of got to marry them on site and send them off, or have them join up in the operational area. And the lack of geographically co-located units means there's a complete lack of cohesion. When you have permanent units assigned to a permanent brigade and they train together, they work together, you build a certain level of camaraderie and cohesion, which means those guys know how to work together. They understand the procedures and everybody's role. When you don't have that, it becomes very difficult. That's a big problem with the Army right now. I mean, there's 1 brigade headquartered in Joburg and 1 in Bloemfontein, and that's really it. You've got 2 mechanized battalions, 6 in reserve, 14 motorized units, 1 artillery regiment, 1 engineer regiment, 1 armored regiment, and 1 Roycut regiment. And that's really it. I mean, I think one of the things that needs to happen is we need to reassess what capabilities SANDF is supposed to give under this new national security strategy. What does the government require from them? And then from there, go and reassess, how many units do we need of what? I think there needs to be a 2-division model, a light division of 4 brigades, and then a medium division of 3 brigades, where you have a mix of motorized, mechanized, and Roycuts. I don't foresee us ever deploying tanks again. I mean, former GOC of the Armor Formation, General Geldenhuys, who was in charge of the Armor Formation from 2000 to 2014, never deployed tanks as a GOC. The last time tanks were deployed, he was a captain training the units back for Operations Modular and Hooper back in the 80s. And we deployed one squadron of 14 tanks, and some of them are still sitting in Angola. And we realized that Southern Africa is not conducive to tank warfare. So we need to have a conversation there. I mean, former Major, now Dr. Everett Jordan at the Military Academy wrote a paper in 2010 about the need for a light armor capability in Africa for SANDF. That is something we definitely need to look at. A shift towards a special operations model and an acceptance that the Army's requirements and the threats that it faces are increasingly irregular, and it needs to adopt a expeditionary-focused irregular warfare approach. But what the Navy faces is increasingly conventional and requires a much larger, more capable Navy. So we're in a bit of a difficult spot there because we've got varying degrees of threats and risks that we need to assess and focus on.
Talk about turning this ship around, if it can be turned around at all. So you've detailed for us, I think, very usefully where things sit from an equipment point of view. Now, final question, if we were to place you in the position of, I don't know, Minister of Defense, and the current minister, she does sometimes moonlight as president, as acting president. So maybe her schedule is freer, and then there's an opening at Minister of Defense. If we could put you in that position, or the equivalent, as it were, in cabinet, or in terms of highest level one can get in the SANDF, what would be your immediate priorities, as it were? So I'm not trying to ask you to solve it over 100 years, but just to start the seed, plant some of the seeds of the turnaround. What would you do, assuming political protection, you've got the money, all that kind of stuff?
First thing I would do is put a freeze on conferences and choir events. They spend a lot of money on those. I would put a freeze on those. No more gift bags. I mean, I've got 4 tote bags with the SANDF logo on. I've got this water bottle with the logo on. I received this at the memorial for the troops coming back in February. I don't know why I was given a tote bag full of merchandise at a funeral. But yeah, I would put a freeze on all of that. I would review the human resource issue and the pipelines. No more permanent contracts, short-term contracts. I would open up more avenues for recruitment, bring back the University Reserve Training Program. For MSDS intakes, I would up it to, instead of one intake of 5,000 a year, I would do one intake every 4 months of about 3,000, so that we can get up to 9,000, maybe up to 4,000 each, so we can total of 12,000 a year, and give an option there for a 4-year contract or a 2-year contract. Bring in a similar thing to what the Australians have, where it's the gap year program, where they bring in about 5 people for just a year to trial out, see who's got potential, give people, to do odd things within the Defence Force. They bring them in just to give them a taste of military life, and it helps with strengthening the civil-military relations, which is pretty low at this current point. And then I would put a review in for the structure of the Defence Force. I would geographically locate units. I would do a review of all the 34,000 buildings that the Defence Force has. What bases can be closed down, which ones need to be reinvigorated. I like the idea of joint support bases, such as Tabatwane becoming a base for both the Air Force and the Army, and having them co-located and working together. I think other areas for that could be Tempe and Langebaanweg down in the Western Cape. We need a new naval base up on the West Coast, probably around Port Nolloth, and then I would start the construction of the Richards Bay one. Review of all the equipment that we need, and man, there's so many things I would do. I mean, I've got like a 30-page list of notes. So there's a lot of things I would do, but I would start with recruitment, and then the soldier first approach. I would take it back down to the light approach. Soldiers, before we buy armored vehicles and helicopters, I want every soldier to have boots, appropriate boots, 2 pairs, good uniforms that fit, modern body armor, and individual first aid kits. I mean, SANDF doesn't issue first aid kits to soldiers. They just go to the medics assigned on the platoon level. So I would bring in individual first aid kits, new helmets, new body armor, new uniforms, fix the standard issue, rifle issue, introduce optics down to the standard rifleman, command and control software. So before we start having new formations of vehicles and stuff, the soldiers that are going to use them, I want them to be as well trained and equipped as possible. and as well motivated and as well fed as possible. I mean, I've seen some of the bases and the kitchens and the food that soldiers get. I want morale to be as high as possible. I want troops to be well fed, well equipped, and taken care of.
Truly revolutionary, going back to basics, right? But that's probably what we do need at this point in time. So I think, I mean, also given geopolitical changes, lots of things happening, not just in South Africa's region, but in the rest of the continent and more broadly. There's more of a risk to South Africa from that, having this incapable SANDF, but also the opportunity. I think really focusing on this area in terms of getting things right from a very basic level. So let's see where we can get at least some of this information. I think this is part of the work that we all continue to do. So on that note, Ricardo, thank you very, very much for your time, your insights, deeply valued. Thank you for the work that you do. To all of you who joined us, thank you very much for watching. If you haven't yet, I invite you to like this video and also subscribe to our YouTube channel if you have not yet done so. If you are interested in becoming a CRA premium client, we invite you to get in contact with us right away. All right, until next time, this has been Chris Hattingh, Executive Director at the Center for Risk Analysis. Take care.